Good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 15th of April 2025. It's Martin North here from Digital Finance Analysts. It's great to have you on and thank you very much for spending some of your Tuesday evening with us. This is going to be a very important show because, of course, we had the housing announcements over the last couple of days and Leith, of course, is all over that like a rash, so it'll be very interesting. But we're going to broaden the conversation as well into some of the other issues that are there. Just before I bring him in, I will just remind you we don't provide specific financial, legal or property advice. It's a general conversation. We do moderate the chat, but feel free to throw your comments, questions and ideas in. I won't necessarily follow all of them, but if you want to get a question directed at Leith or myself, if you use @Walk the World, then it'll come into my queue, which will help me to get it up on the screen. I've enabled Super Chat, which means if you want to get to the question, get your question up on the list, you can do that, or indeed make a contribution to what we do around here. Always greatly appreciated. Even if it's a profit, we do this because it was a really, really important conversation, and as never, given the fact, never before, given the election issues we've got. So there we are. Let me bring Leith straight in. Hey, Leith, welcome back. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Lot to talk about tonight. Good to be here.
Opportune time for a conversation. I was listening to these announcements over the weekend thinking, you cannot be serious. You cannot be serious. I don't believe it. I mean, it's like, what parallel world are those politicians living in?
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely crazy. So I think, honestly, there's probably an argument to have shorter, election cycles. Well, I mean, sorry, not so much election cycles, but shorter election campaigns, I should say, because the longer this one's dragged on, the worse the policy's got. And I remember doing an interview a couple of weeks ago on, I can't remember which outfit, radio or something like that. And it was after the budget. And I was actually sort of, pretty relieved. I said, it wasn't too bad. It's election budget. I expected a lot more pork. And so I was actually kind of happy that there wasn't too much pork in it. And then fast forward, 2 more weeks, we've had obviously the Trump tariffs, everything else. And then, as you said, I woke up Sunday morning, opened up the phone, had a bit of a hangover because I had some friends over Saturday night. Opened up my phone and I couldn't believe it. It was like reading The Onion. So, you're reading these leaks, I guess, because they're saying later today this is what's going to happen. So it was obviously, pre-leaked to the media. And then you had Labor's absurd housing policy, and then followed up by the coalition's absurd housing policy. And they just seem to be we're basically in a race to the bottom here in the housing market. Both sides are intent on blowing a ginormous property bubble. I mean, we've already got one, let's face it, close enough. And they just want to inflate it even more and just basically throw taxpayers to the wolves to keep this property Ponzi going. And yeah, I must admit, mate, I've never been more disheartened by the state of policy making and politics in this country. And I must admit, you've jumped the shark when you look back to like the Howard Costello days with nostalgia, wishing you could go back there, because they seem like titans compared to the Muppet Show we've had since for the last 20 years. So it's just been, it's appalling. Every single year it gets worse. I used to always trash the baby boomers thinking, they've wrecked the joint. But I got to say, the people wrecking the joint now is my generation. I'm Gen X, because we've got the keys to the kingdom and we are burning the place down with our policy making. It is deplorable what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying, Leith, that this isn't just a happenstance. This isn't just, the Ukraine war or gas prices, right? This is a deliberate policy over a number of years. And in fact, this is a slide which just really brings it home, right? This is the 55 years of property prices and household income. And you can see there that things started to go awry in the 1990s. And by the early 2000s, things like capital gains tax discount was introduced and, deregulation of the financial system, et cetera, et cetera. So the ratio between the gross disposable income per capita and property prices have just shot away. And now it's at a very unsustainable level. But the point is, the policies that were announced over the last couple of days are going to drive property prices even higher. So I don't understand how this solves anything. It just creates a bigger issue. And my perspective has always been that it's policy, it's bad policy over a generation plus that's got us to this point. This isn't just, one factor, it's multi-factor, but the policies are wrong.
Yeah, that's right. And as you said, this is deliberate. So we had the housing minister, Claire O'Neill, was on, I think it was Triple J, The Drum, late last year, November or so. And she was asked directly, doesn't affordable houses mean, doesn't the definition of affordability for housing mean that prices have to fall? And she said, no, we want prices to rise sustainably. And at the time, myself and others criticised her and bagged her for basically, not being serious on the on solving the housing shortage and the I should say the housing affordability crisis. And then on the weekend, of course, Peter Dutton was asked the same question, and he said, no, we want prices to rise sustainably. We don't want existing homeowners to suffer. And then Albo was asked the same thing, and he said the same thing. So this is a deliberate policy here. They want to suck more people into the market under the guise of affordability, but really it is about keeping the bubble going, pushing prices higher, fattening themselves because, let's face it, politicians own a hell of a lot of property as well. And the real winners at the end of this are going to be really those with property, property investors. So, those of us who own our homes or paying off a mortgage, yeah, sure, okay, the value of asset goes up, but you've got to buy and live in, you've got to buy and sell in the same market, right? So you're not really better off if your home value goes up. It's just really your house is somewhere to live. It doesn't matter if it's worth 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, whatever. It has the same utility. But the people who are really going to win from this are those with second properties, right? Because both sides of politics have said we're going to push prices higher, and if you've got housing assets outside your own home, you're going to make a monster. Let's face it. And it's shocking, for me. I've obviously got my house and all that sort of stuff, but I've got 2 teenage kids, and you look at these policies and you go, great, it's just going to go up. The prices are going to keep going up. It's going to be more expensive for them to buy when their time comes. And of course, they're going to have to lean on the bank of mum and dad harder just to be able to get into the property market. And this is an intergenerational disaster in the making.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just worth thinking about this more broadly, because when those policies were first announced, a lot of the media was saying, well, it's targeted at, those people who are trying to get into the property sector, the first-time buyers, et cetera, et cetera. But when you stand back and think about it, and as Saul Astlake made the point, if you think of the total population base in Australia, there are way more people who own property, either with a mortgage or without, either direct property holders, versus the relatively small proportion, maybe 600,000, who are trying to get in or aspire to get in. So you want to target your policies directly or indirectly at the largest number. It's a math game, right?
Yep.
And so therefore, this is actually about stroking those already with property, saying, don't worry, folks, your property price is not going to go down under our watches. And both sides of politics are saying precisely the same thing. I mean, I think Claire O'Neill's comments earlier on were pretty ridiculous. But then when you see both Dutton and Albo reinforcing it, property prices are going to go up, which is why I started with this gap between, income and prices. We've got to the point now where it's so difficult for people to get in, and therefore there are a lot of people who will never own a property. And of course, they are being forced into the rental sector. And the other side of all this is that there's always been nothing across the policy spectrum, specifically at the rental sector, where, of course, a lot of the issues are, other than the Greens' nutty idea of freezing rents, which, given everything else that's going on, doesn't make a lot of sense either. So 1/3 of the population in the rental sector are effectively disenfranchised from the policy conversation. The 2/3 with property are saying, don't worry, folks, property prices are going to go higher.
Yeah, and obviously, house prices are set at the margin, right? So what is it? I think about 5% of homes every year turn over. So thereabouts, obviously it changes year to year. Some years it might be less, other years slightly more, but it's roughly 5% over the long haul. And that means that 5%, 1 in 20 homes, effectively sets the price for the other for everyone else. So obviously, if you juice, so according to Labor with their policy, maybe we should go through the policies one by one, but so Labor reckons under their policy, I think 80,000 first home buyers a year or something like that, they project to take it up. And that is a very big chunk of the amount of homes that are sold every year. And if you can push those prices up, you push up the housing values for everyone. And we're looking at a housing market here that's worth over $11 trillion. It is absolutely ginormous. It's just over 4 times the size of the economy. It's one of the biggest, I guess, housing bubbles in the world, if you want to call it that. And Australia has, if you just go through the numbers here, the reason why we've got a housing crisis is we've got some of the most expensive housing in the world relative to incomes. We've got some of the highest household debt in the world. We're right at the top of the, top of the charts there in the world. And then we've also got, we don't have cross-country comparisons for this, but, Australians are paying the highest share of their incomes on record in rents as well. So we've got record low housing affordability thereabouts, record low rental affordability, and we're carrying, some of the highest household debt in the world. And when you got that situation, the government's obviously said, all right, we've already tapped everyone out as far as we can. The only way we can keep it going is to basically massively increase borrowing capacity and subsidize people to borrow more. And that's how you blow the bubble even bigger. And that's effectively what they're doing.
Absolutely. And, there are consequences of this. The first is, of course, prices higher means that effectively there's more tax being paid. So, stamp duty. Prices higher mean that the banks are lending more. So then the growth of the mortgage book has been running faster than the inflation the whole of the last 2 or 3 years, right? For decades, but particularly the last 2 or 3 years. With inflation running very high, now they're still lending a lot more. And then the proliferation, of course, also of the multi-property investor holder. So you're still seeing quite a few people with multiple investment properties. We've got the negative gains, the negative gearing and the tax gains that you can get with investment property, which is making it very attractive. So there are tax benefits still to doing it. So the whole system is set up in a way to effectively just keep those prices rising, and the banks win, governments win, et cetera, and it's only really at election time that maybe people seriously think about, well, man, are there alternatives? But no alternatives on the table at the moment other than more of the same, only on steroids. And it's interesting because some of the commentators were saying, well, maybe Labour's proposition isn't quite as bad as the coalitions, right? And or maybe
in some ways it's worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, should we go through them maybe?
Yeah, it's worth doing. I think.
Yeah. Cons and cons, but cons and bigger cons, I guess. But anyway, as I said, I've got a chart, just a screen here with basically of all the housing affordability metrics. This was at the end of 2024 from CoreLogic, so they're a couple of months old, but they pretty much tell the story. So we had, the dwelling price to income ratio was basically at a record high or equal record high. 8 times incomes. Percentage of income spent on rent, record high, 33%. That's median income versus the median rent. Number of years taken to save for a deposit, basically at an equal record high, 10.6 years is nationally. The proportion of income needed to meet mortgage repayments, record high, 50% on average. So that's obviously for a new mortgage. And the bottom middle chart there is from PropTrack. That's from their rental affordability report. The share of rentals that are affordable, record low. That's as of, I think, the March quarter. And average loan size, record high. So, I mean, it's a slam dunk. Property's never been this unaffordable. So just taking through the policies that have been announced, in the month before the election, pretty much, and during the election campaign. So on Labor, have got 3 main policies. So the first one they mentioned about a month ago was they were going to exclude, maybe I think it was the last time I was on, maybe February. They were going to they promised to exclude student debt from mortgage serviceability calculations. And according to Compare the Market, that's the top left-hand side chart, the Compare the Market worked out what the borrowing power boost was from this policy. And they said, and if you're on a pre-tax income of 125K, based on just this policy, you can now borrow $95,000 more. So that's this policy alone, by excluding student debt from mortgage serviceability calculations, has increased borrowing capacity. They've also expanded Help to Buy. That's their shared equity scheme. And what they've done there is they've basically, increased the income limits so you can have higher income. They've also increased the price of the homes that you can get it for. And what under that policy, Labor, or the federal government, I should say, will take 30 to 40% equity in the home. So it basically means that you can buy a more expensive home and you'll part own it with the government, i.e. taxpayer. So that's going to put more demand. So that one's capped at 10,000 buyers a year. And then last but not least, on the weekend, the Labor government promised that every single first home buyer virtually will be able to borrow a home with a 5% deposit. So the way they're going to do that is because currently you need a 20% deposit, and if you have less than that, you got to pay lender's mortgage insurance, which can cost 20 to 30K. So most people don't borrow with a 5% deposit because it's very expensive, and so banks want you to have a bigger deposit. So Labor's basically said, no, 5% deposit is good. Taxpayers will guarantee 15% of your mortgage, and that is for pretty much all first home buyers. So what Labor's chosen to massively increase borrowing capacity. If you look at the bottom middle chart there, bottom right-hand chart, home prices versus capacity to pay, that shows you how out of whack house prices are with borrowing capacity. And what Labor wants to do is they want to increase that blue line. So they want to get capacity pay back up towards the red line. And that'll happen through these policies because basically first home buyers are going to be able to borrow a hell of a lot more. And it's going to bring forward a lot of demand. So first home buyers that previously couldn't get in the market will now be able to get in the market. They'll borrow more. They'll be bidding up house prices. And all this is going to do, it's going to put an absolute rocket under house prices. And it comes at the same time as the latest financial market projections for interest rates are that we're going to get another potentially 5 interest rate cuts this year. So by the end of the year, the financial markets tip that we'll have an interest rate of about 2.85%. That's the official cash rate. It's 4.1% currently. So we're going to have this perfect storm situation whereby the RBA is cutting interest rates. Whether the financial markets are correct, who knows? But interest rates should come down. It's whether it's how many cuts. But that'll increase borrowing capacity, as well as Labor's policies will massively increase borrowing capacity. And basically, they're going to Labor's policy is a state-sponsored subprime mortgage scheme. That's effectively what it is. They want to bring in a whole bunch of marginal borrowers into the housing market so they can juice demand. And whenever you do that, just like every other demand-side policy that's been introduced in the last 20 years or 25 years, it's going to lead to higher house prices. And the ultimate inevitable outcome of this is that we're going to have Australians carrying higher mortgage debts because they'll be borrowing a lot more. They'll have less equity because they'll be borrowing with 5% deposits, and we're going to have much higher house prices. And this is self-defeating from a housing affordability perspective. It's self-defeating from a financial stability perspective. It puts taxpayers on the hook if there ever is an eventual house price bust, if everything goes awry down the track, because we've guaranteed 15% of all these first home buyers deposits, etc. And it is a state-sponsored subprime mortgage scheme here. It is ridiculous. And the solution to housing affordability is not to pump more financial capital into a market. All you're doing is you're going to have more people and more money chasing the same number of homes, and they're just going to be bidding the price up. And that is the antithesis of housing affordability. Housing affordability requires prices to come down. It doesn't require prices to go up. Yet Labor's policy is going to blow the mother of all housing bubbles. Now, onto the coalition. The coalition I'm less worried about because they're not going to win, right? They're so far behind the polls. But the coalition's had some dumb policies as well. The first one they announced, months ago was to allow first home buyers to access their super for a housing deposit, which is just moronic. Again, just going to lead to more money going into the market, going to bid up house prices. And their other brainiac, i.e. dumb idea, was to allow effectively owner-occupiers, first home buyers to negatively gear a new home, a mortgage on a new home. Now, it is capped at $650,000 mortgage, but basically tax-deductible mortgages for first home buyers if you purchase a new home. And this is just ridiculous stuff. So according to the coalition, they reckon that a buyer on $120,000 income at prevailing interest rates, on a $650,000 mortgage would save $12,000 in tax a year under this policy. Now, where do you think that $12,000 is going to come from? It's going to come straight out of the federal budget. And this is at a time when the federal budget is projected to be in deficit for the next decade. The coalition is going to strip it of even more tax revenue purely to push up house prices. Now, the only advantage of the coalition's policy over, in terms of the tax deductible mortgages, is that it's for new homes only. So whereas Labor's 5% deposits is for all homes, and most of that's going to go into the established market. But all it's going to end up doing is going to end up pushing up the price of new homes, similar to what the home builder stimulus did during the pandemic. And developers will use it to fatten their margins, they'll fatten their profits on the taxpayer's dime. It'll be inflationary for new home prices. And it's also, coalition's policy is also incredibly regressive and inequitable, because the more you earn, effectively, the bigger your tax deduction, because it's effectively negative gearing policy, right? So if you're a higher income, there are some income limits. I think for a couple, it's like 250,000, I think it is, maybe 240,000. But still, the higher you are up the income scale up to the limit, the bigger your tax deductions will be from this owner-occupier negative gearing. So it's also incredibly regressive and inequitable, because higher income earners will be getting bigger tax deductions under the coalition's policy. So, the coalition's policy, moronic. It's going to pump up new home prices. Their first home buyer access to super is going to pump up all house prices. They're going to blow a big hole in the budget just because of the negative gearing aspect. There was estimates, the coalition reckons it's going to cost $1.5 billion a year. Some other tax people reckon it could cost anywhere between $4 and $8 billion. This is straight out of the federal budget bottom line. Means you're going to have bigger budget deficits, and it's incredibly inequitable. So, look, both parties get an absolute fail on this, and both of them are. If there's one thing politicians agree on, or the two main parties agree on, is that house prices should go up, and the housing bubble should become bigger. It's crazy.
Absolutely. Well, I actually made a show at the weekend called Con Job, Housing Dog Whistles and Sugar Hits as Election Day Looms, right? Which basically is another way of saying it's a con job. And just a couple of observations. The Productivity Commission last year published a very important report. And one of the things that they highlighted was the fact that all of these first home buyer incentives and the other things, all it did was to create more inequality in the housing market, because it allowed a few to get in. Often those who would have got in anyway got in a little quicker, but it didn't really touch the sides on the larger proportion of people who just are completely excluded from getting into the property market. So even, government analysis is saying these don't work. And in fact, I'd argue that one of the key reasons we've had all the issues we've had over recent years is these government handouts. And if you go back to COVID, when, of course, they did the home builder, and, money was flying everywhere, guess what? Property prices immediately jumped up by the amount of the supports. So it doesn't solve anything. It just makes it more inequitable. The other point here is that, of course, the budget deficit is getting, ever larger at the moment. And whilst Chalmers claims to have sort of squeezed it down over the last couple of years, well, they're not projecting that ahead. And given the international situation, given the pressures on the financial system, et cetera, this is nuts, because what we're creating is wiring in more financial instability into the financial system again. And it's interesting that there's research from the RBA showing that these high loan-to-value loans are much more prone in a crisis to go wrong. The question now, of course, is that when things go wrong, under Labour's, the government will pick up the scheme.
Yeah, it is absolutely crazy. And you've got to think about also the productivity impact here. So, I wish I had the chart here. Usually, whenever we do these things, I always forget to put a chart in. I wish I had it. This is a classic one, though. So, in 1990, before the Basel Capital framework fully came into effect, or just as it was being introduced, and etc., Australian banks lent about 2/3 to businesses and about 1/3 to mortgages. Now, or, it flipped around over the subsequent period, but for the last, decade or a couple of decades or so, banks have now lent, they now lend basically 2/3 to mortgages and 1/3 to businesses. And that is completely, so we've gone from having a mostly productive banking system that was actually there to fund productive enterprise to one that's just basically a giant building society to lend to mortgages. And under these policies, both of them, let's be honest, and especially Labor's actually, Labor's particularly, if you're going to have 5% deposits, you're going to have bigger loans from the banks. It just means that they're going to be, partially guaranteed by the taxpayer. And, if the banks are precluded from including student debts and things like that in their calculations, that people can borrow more. So this just means that we're going to be, the banks are going to be lending even more into the property market. And their share of lending is going to be even more skewed towards housing. And we're going to have sink more of the nation's productive capital into the property market, which is already, over $11 trillion in size and dwarfs the economy by a factor of 4. This is just absolute lunacy here. We should be weaning ourselves off, this whole property addiction. But both sides of Parliament are just saying, no, we're going to double down. We're going to put all our chips in it, and we're going to blow it even higher. And, it's almost like they are competing to have the biggest housing bubble in the history of the world.
Yeah. And so, there are marginal differences on the two sides here in terms of the policies, but the net impact is going to be roughly similar. It's going to be higher prices for longer. Does nothing for productivity of the country. It does nothing for the economic security of the country. In fact, it makes us more fragile.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely makes it worse because, again, Australia is going to be sucking more of its capital into unproductive housing, just basically to put a roof over our head instead of doing other things that are actually productive. And we're also putting the federal budget at risk as well to do so. So this is just crazy. We're tipping more taxpayer money into it. We're tipping more of our financial capital into it. It's a sinkhole. And, you would have hoped that both sides would have at least done nothing this election, but instead they've just gone, you know what, we're going to go hog wild on it. And it's just absolutely crazy. And if you're a poor renter, there's absolutely nothing for you because, at least the coalition had a plan to reduce immigration somewhat, which would take pressure off the rental market. But Labor doesn't have that. And unfortunately, the renters are just going to keep having this situation, the permanent situation whereby, demand through high immigration and population growth, etc., continues to overrun supply. And that's just going to keep the rental vacancy rate under pressure. And, it's going to keep upward pressure on rents. And, we have seen some rental inflation come off, but that's largely because, and CoreLogic has a report coming out about it tomorrow, which I can't say too much about, it's under embargo, but effectively, they talk about how Australians are moving into group housing now to counter the rental crisis because rents have gone up so much. It's become so unaffordable. Again, that chart I showed you earlier showed that rental affordability, i.e. the amount of money that households are paying on rents as a share of their income has never been higher than it was at the end of last year. So, renters are getting squeezed, and the federal government has this fantasy, 1.2 million homes over 5 years target that is just so far behind being met. It's, running a quarter. The run rate's about a quarter under what it predicted. And yet we've got the throttle on population growth, and it's going to continue because, Labor doesn't really want to slash immigration, which is what it should do. And it's just a disaster for all sides. It's a disaster for purchase affordability and a disaster for rental affordability.
Yeah, and just on the migration, if I just put this one up, you can see here that the latest data, this is from Emptor and Macro, shows that there was a bit of a spike up and more recently. And Tom said, seriously, 200,000 new arrivals in this country in the last 30 days. I don't know whether that's exactly right, but it's pretty close. In the middle of a housing...
February was a record.
Yeah, in the middle of a housing and rental crisis. If I was young, I'd leave Australia. Your government seriously hates you. And, I don't think he's wrong.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, sure. Immigration's come off a little bit, but now, according to the monthly permanent long-term arrivals data of February, it's now spiked up again at the start of the year. So, that from Antipody and Macro, Justin Fabo, shows it beautifully. And the monthly permanent long-term arrivals data, as you can see there, does track the official net overseas migration. It's like a leading indicator. And that has surged. And February was a record month for international students as well, arriving. So, February has seen once again, well, it looks like it's only a couple of months data, obviously, but the start of the year looks like it's rebounding again. And this just means more pressure for renters because, when migrants come to Australia, they don't arrive with a home in their backpack. They've got to live somewhere. And obviously, most of them are going to live in the private rental market. And if they do that, they're going to be putting pressure on rents. And, I actually had a debate with, not a direct debate. We weren't, talking to each other and countering each other. But, Max Chandler-Mather, the Greens housing spokesman, went on ABC Brisbane, and he basically brushed off concerns because Steve Austin's a really good host. I've been interviewed by him many times. He's excellent. And he asked Max, what about this impact on immigration on rents? Because, the Greens announced their housing policy, which includes a freeze on rents and blah, blah, blah. And he asked him, well, what about immigration? And Max said, no. That's scapegoating. The migrants have not caused any of this housing crisis. There's some excellent research, that dodgy research by the University of Adelaide, which was nonsensical, shows that they've had no impact on the housing market. It's got nothing to do with excessive migrants or international students and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, Steve Austin texted me and he said, what do you think? And I said, basically, I texted him back saying, Max is an absolute idiot. Get me on. So he interviewed me the next day and I ripped Max a new one. But I also wrote an article in Macrobusiness around it. And, I've got some charts here. So Max Chandler-Mather just keeps crapping on that migration has no impact on rents. But the actual data is so freaking obvious, and it's not just here in Canada as well, that you'd have to be an absolute either a moron or dishonest to acknowledge the relationship. It's so obvious. So, the charts on the left and top and bottom are from Justin Fabo again at Antipody and Macro. It shows temporary visa holders in Australia quarterly, and then he's got the capital city asking rents. Funny how at the start of the pandemic, when temporary migrants left, rents fell, especially units. And when they came back in record numbers, rents surged. The chart top middle again shows it's basically a ratio of annual change in population to annual change in high density dwelling completions. So it's basically a supply demand chart. Pretty damn close relationship there between the black is the effectively supply demand balance versus growth in CPI rents. Basically a 1-for-1 correlation. I also said to Steve Austin on ABC Radio that when the pandemic hit and international students left and temporary migrants left, we had heaps of articles in the paper about landlords whinging that their rents had fallen and there was no one to rent their homes to. And I put a quick snippet from realestate.com.au, which is from 23rd of April 2021. And this article was Sydney property investors hurt by lack of international students. Well, what does that tell you? When they left, they're all screaming because the rents were falling and they were losing money. And the hilarious thing in that article, it actually points to data from the Mitchell Institute from Victoria University. And they said that international students on average, 36% of the money they spend in Australia is on housing. 36%. Now, the latest data from the ABS said that international students spent over $50 billion on in Australia last calendar year or last financial year. Well, 36% of $50 billion is about $18 billion going into the housing market. Well, guess what? Most of that goes in the rental market. So what does people think, at least $10 billion or more dollars going into the rental market's going to do to rents? Is it going to push them up or down? Like, this is moron stuff. And finally, I've got some great data here. On the right-hand side, so Canada implemented a immigration freeze in the second half of last year. So, there was such a backlash against high immigration because it sent rents to the roof and it was causing all these problems in Canada that their government actually froze immigration for 3 years. And so they're aiming for 0.3% population growth for 3 years, right? This is after the 2023-24 financial year, they received 1.2 million net overseas migrants, an insane number. And guess what? Anyway, so in the December quarter of last year, population growth in Canada slowed to a crawl. They actually had negative temporary migration. So temporary migrants are leaving Canada. And shock horror, average asking rents have fallen for 6 straight months in Canada, right? That's after temporary migrants started leaving and they're basically frozen population growth. Well, what does that tell you? Maybe that immigration has an impact on the housing market, on the rental market. And the chart at the bottom there, which comes from Ben Rabideau, who's an analyst, he put up on Twitter or X the temporary migrants, the growth in temporary migrants versus the growth in annual CPI rents. Looks like a pretty strong one-for-one correlation to me. What do you think? So this is Canada. So Canada and Australia have almost a perfect correlation between immigration and rents, right? So, but the Greens keep trying to gaslight us and lying to us, saying that immigration and the volume of international students has no impact on rents. Like, this is farcical stuff. So we have Labor and Liberal basically trying to pump a bigger property bubble through their dumb demand side policies. And then we have the Greens lying to us about the impact of immigration on rents and then calling everyone a racist, anyone a racist who wants to have lower immigration. They've come out straight out and called Peter Dutton's the coalition's 25% reduction in permanent migrants, which isn't even much. It's still going to be very high. They called it racist dog whistling, a race to the bottom, scapegoating migrants, xenophobic, blah, blah, blah. And anytime anybody suggests cutting immigration in any sort of way, the Greens hail racism. And then they try and say it has no impact on the housing market. And their official immigration policy, if you go to the website, is to have more immigration. So we've just got a clown show here. Doesn't matter which of the three big three parties you vote for, you're going to have a housing debacle. So, if the Greens got the balance of power, there's no way they'd let Labor cut immigration at all. They'd be lobbying for more immigration because that's their official policy. And anytime anybody suggests having lower immigration, they cry blue murder and they always lobby for more immigration, even though they're supposed to be an environmental party, which makes no sense. And then you got Labor and Liberals who just want to pump a bigger property bubble. So this is the madness that we have in Australia at the moment, Martin. It is absolutely maddening for someone like you and me who's been watching this for the better part of 12, 13 years and just shaking our heads.
Well, I did my first interview on ABC in 2001 when I first did my surveys.
Wow.
And I was warning then of the slippery slope that we were actually starting on. I said, what we will find is that over the next few years, prices are going to go up relative to incomes, etc. So high migration. Now, it was all there. All of the seeds were being sown in the early 2000s, right? And then we had the GFC and, low rates and everything else. A couple of interesting points. First is there was a report from the university sector themselves that said about 7% of rental properties were actually used by students. So it's quite a big number.
1 in 14.
Yeah, 1 in 14, 7%. You also mentioned the South Australian Mickey Mouse piece of research, which came out of left field saying, there's no relationship at all between migration and...
Mate, that was the biggest, most moronic bit of modelling. So they actually used the vacancy rate as an independent variable.
Yeah.
Right? So the volume of international students and immigration pushes down the rental vacancy rate, right? So what they said, rents are correlated to the vacancy rate. So the lower the vacancy rate goes, the higher the rents. But then they said the vacancy rate is an independent variable. So it's not related to the international students, which is just clown show stuff. Like when the migrants left at the start of the pandemic, the temporary migrants left, the vacancy rate spiked. It went through the roof and rents fell. And then when they came back in record numbers, the vacancy rate collapsed and then rents rose. But their dumb modelling treats the vacancy rate as a independent variable and then tried to somehow say, rents went up because the vacancy rate fell, but that wasn't because of the international students, so therefore it's not the international students. It's just, it made no sense. It was the most nonsensical report ever, yet the Greens linked to this report. So in one of their media releases where they attacked Dutton's, planned reduction in students and temporary visas, they said, reputable studies have come out saying that proving, that international students have zero impact on the rental market, and they actually linked to the study. But then when you read the study and you look at you go, this is a clown show stuff. Like, it makes no sense. And Louis Christopher from SQM Research, Cameron Kusher, former CoreLogic and PropTrack, a whole bunch of others all got on Twitter saying this is, even Peter Tulip from the CIS has said, what? Justin Farbo, Antibody and Macro, questioned it. Everybody was like, what the hell? This makes no sense. This is not befitting a university putting out this garbage. But we know why they've done it, because both the authors were former international students and they work in an area of the uni which is designed to promote international students. So obviously they want more of it. It's like a tobacco industry putting out a dodgy study saying, cigarettes aren't, they're not that bad for you, and then duking the stats and whatever. And of course, they're talking their own book. So that's all that was. But the Greens are holding this up as proof. Like, it's just, and the ABC ran it, the Guardian, they all jumped in it like it was fact. And see, here's the proof. But, to the ABC's credit, Steve Austin, ABC Brisbane, absolute legend. He gets me on all the time and he lets me speak my mind. And and he let me shoot Max Chandler down on air in Queensland. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I just want to mention the ABC, I thought, went way over the top on this piece of quote news, right? Without really any critical analysis or observation at all. They just sort of parroted it back. And that went out through all of its channels for a day or two before people started saying, excuse me, hang on, this doesn't make any sense, right? It was because I guess it was in line with perhaps an agenda that some people would like to propagate rather than actually...
Yeah, it's a woke agenda. Let's just call it what it is. It's the woke agenda. Like the ABC has been, let's face it, the ABC has been overrun with these culture warriors, right? Who, you're not allowed to question immigration numbers because a number's racist. You can't question all this stuff. They're wedded to this net zero garbage. It's the way they are. And look, deplorably, I'm going to have a go at the ABC here. Like, there's obviously good ones like, Steve Austin and others. There are some good journos in there, but they're the minority. When Peter Dutton announced his gas reservation policy, which is actually excellent and exactly what Australia needs, he announced that in the budget reply speech. In the half an hour after the budget reply, I watched it. And they had Laura Tingle there, who's, she's always happy to call everyone racist, anybody racist who wants to have lower immigration, etc. And the 7:30 report lady, I can't remember her name, Sarah Henderson, I think, or something, Sarah Ferguson, I can't remember. But they had her, and both of them were basically attacking Dutton's gas reservation plan and citing effectively talking points from the gas cartel, like, oh, this is terrible for sovereign risk. Oh, but if we have gas reservation, we're just going to be denying supply to Asian customers who need it, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, are you representing us? Like, do you represent Australians, or are you a mouthpiece for the gas cartel? And do you care more about Chinese gas users than you do Australian gas users? Because that's what it sounded like. And this is the ABC. This is our taxpayer dollars at work. Like, I honestly, mate, I can't stand them, to be quite frank. And I can't believe we have to spend our money on this junk.
No, well, I actually made a show on the gas policy, gas, one policy to rule them all, because cost of energy is a fundamental question for Australia, right? In terms of things like productivity, in terms of things like competition, so many factors. And, the one policy that stands out on the coalition side is this reservation policy. It's not perfect, but it's the first time.
It's good.
Yeah, first time that a bit of policy has actually come out and sensibly. And it's interesting that, Shell, I think, came out and said, well, actually, if you do that, it's going to actually put downward pressure on gas prices.
Yeah, mate, Shell, yeah. And hilariously, Shell's one of the owners of one of the East Coast, the gas cartel export trains, right? Or at least a part owner or whatever. And they came out going, oh, no, they said this is going to oversupply the East Coast market, and it's going to put even more downward pressure than the 10 gigajoule prices that Dutton promised. Now, look, $10 a gigajoule. Sorry, $10 gigajoule. So, $10 gigajoule is more expensive than it should be, right? It's still an expensive price. But at the moment, we pay $12 or $13, depending on the day. Sometimes actually went up to 20 about 6 months ago, briefly. But you've got to look at the counterfactual here, right? So under the coalition's policy, you're going to get domestic reservation. The coalition won't put any of the export contracts at risk because all he's going to do, he's going to stop the gas exporters from selling uncontracted gas, i.e. spot gas, into the export market. They're going to have to sell that domestically because we've got a shortage. And the spot price is what sets the electricity price. It's what the electricity sector uses for uncontracted gas is what the electricity sector uses in its gas-fired furnaces. So if you can get a lower spot gas price, you're going to have lower electricity prices. So it's really good. Now, the counterfactual to this is doing nothing, right? And that's Labor's policy. And the East Coast faces a shortage of gas. And basically, we've already committed, if we don't have this reservation policy, to begin importing gas through LNG terminals. So the first one's been planned for Port Kembla in New South Wales, and it was being flagged by the end of this year or early next year. There's also 2 more that have been flagged for one for Victoria, one for South Australia. Now, if we start importing gas, which is just absurd given that we export nearly 3/4 of it on the East Coast, right? Most of that goes to China. If we start importing gas, we won't be paying basically export parity prices, which is what we pay now, which is basically the export price before you have to liquefy it and put it on a ship, etc. We'll be paying import parity prices because we'll be buying liquefied natural gas. We'll be buying export gas that has been gone through the liquefaction process. It's been frozen to -200 or whatever it is to turn into liquid. That's incredibly energy intensive. You use a lot of energy to do it. You use a lot of gas to do it. So it costs a lot of money. And then we'll pay for the freight and then the cost to turn it back into gas, all this sort of stuff. So the alternative to Dutton's plan of $10 East Coast gas is $20 gas, right, through imports. And that is the counterfactual here. Peter Dutton's gas policy, yes, it's not perfect, but it should deliver effectively half the gas price of what we're facing if we start importing gas, which is what Labor's policy effectively is. And all that means is that if our gas price jumps to $20 when we start importing it, and it might take a year to get there or adjust upwards, that's going to decimate what's left of our manufacturing sector, which has already seen the loss of our last plastics manufacturer, Quinos. We just lost Oceania Glass, which is our last architectural glass maker. BlueScope Steel, Incitec Pivot shut down a couple of its fertilizer plants because of high gas prices. BlueScope Steel has warned they're going to look at downsizing and moving to America because gas is cheaper over there, energy is cheaper. Orica, explosives and fertilizer maker, have said they're looking to downsize and potentially move to the US. There's a whole bunch of manufacturers have either looking to close if prices keep going up or downsize, or other ones that we don't, little smaller manufacturers we haven't heard of. We're all going to shut down if we have this expensive energy. And it also means we're going to have obviously higher cost of living. It's going to push up. If you're a Victorian like me, you have gas heating, you're going to be paying a hell of a lot more to heat your house. We're going to have higher electricity prices because gas is a marginal price setter for electricity because it's used for peaking. So whenever there's not enough renewables or whatever else, which is a lot because the sun only shines during the day and the wind only blows when the wind blows, you need gas for peaking. And if that gas price goes up, the electricity prices go up. So this is the future Australia's facing if we do not have an East Coast reservation policy. And unfortunately, it looks like Labor's going to win the election quite easily now and probably expand their majority. So if we do not have this gas reservation policy and Labor wins, we're looking at higher gas, higher electricity and higher energy prices. And that's not to mention the plan for this 82% renewable energy target, which is pie in the sky, which if that came into effect, we'd be shutting down all, baseload coal, which we've used for years, which is relatively cheap. And we'll be spending $500 billion plus on building out renewables, which are intermittent and will cost a fortune because we have to spend $500 billion on all sorts of things, whether it's poles and wires and batteries and pumped hydro and all this other stuff. And those costs will go to the regulatory asset base, which is used to set prices, and it'll end up flowing into our power bills. So, Australia, despite the fact it's swimming in coal, swimming in natural gas, has all this stuff that the rest of the world needs. We export 4 times more gas than we use ourselves. We export about 5 to 6 times more coal than we use domestically. We're going to deny ourselves the opportunity to actually use that stuff and use it cheaply, all for the sake of net zero and exporting energy security to Asia. And the ultimate result is going to be we're going to have no industry left, and we're going to be paying a hell of a lot for energy. And our economy is going to get deindustrialized. We're going to have constant inflationary pressures and cost of living, and we're going to be a hell of a lot poorer. And that's the policy.
Japan has taken our gas and sold it on.
And China.
And China.
Yeah, China's doing it too.
Yeah. So effectively, they are making money, we are not.
Yeah, and I've actually got some interesting charts. Now, I've updated these from last time. So, this is kind of controversial, but I think Australia should completely abandon this net zero push. And I'm being pragmatic here because just last week, President Trump signed 4 executive orders to bring back coal mining, coal-fired generation in the US, etc. So that's the second biggest carbon emitter in the world, which is over the past couple of decades. They've switched their electricity generation from 50% coal at the turn of the century to about 15% currently, because they've switched to gas and some renewables. President Trump said, no, we're going to bring back coal because China's doing it and India's doing it. And China has increased its coal use by 50% in the last decade, and India has increased its coal use by 70-odd% in the last decade. And both nations, both China and India, have said they're going to keep burning more coal. So they're going to have more coal mines, more coal-fired generation, more coal use. The US now has said they're going to expand coal use and go back to coal. So here we have the 3 biggest carbon emitters in the world. China, which accounts for almost a third of the world's carbon emissions, and that's the top left chart, has driven nearly 2/3 of the world's carbon emission growth since the turn of the century, is the main driver of carbon emission. And India, which is also a big driver because it's growing fast, have said they're going to keep burning coal and they're going to burn more of it. And the United States, which is the second biggest carbon emitter, they said they're going to burn more coal. So that's 3, the biggest emitters, count for 52% of the world's carbon emissions, have all said they're going to burn more coal. Those 3 countries alone have 1,650 coal-fired power plants, according to Statista. Australia has 18. What are we doing here? Are we really going to say, you know what, to save the planet with our 1% of carbon emissions, we're going to wean ourselves off coal, and we're going to go to a lot more expensive generation sources and give ourselves expensive energy, and we're going to send all our manufacturing over to Asia because we can't manufacture anything here anymore because it's too expensive. We're going to deindustrialize. We're going to have basically not have an economy anymore for the sake of net zero, while the 3 biggest emitters, that account for over half of the world's carbon emissions, 52%-ish, are going to expand their coal use. Like, what are we doing here? China alone burns 30% more coal than the rest of the world combined, and it's expanding its coal use. China and India are the 2 biggest users of coal in the world, and they're expanding their coal use. America is not a big user of coal now. Still has 264 coal-fired generators to R18, but it said it's going to open up more and reopen coal plants and coal-fired generation. So they're going to have more as well. So why are we shooting ourselves in the foot trying to be the net zero hero in a world where the 3 biggest emitters aren't playing the same game? Like, Australia can't save the world, but we can save ourselves. And I think it's about time we save ourselves. We abandon this foolishness.
Well, it doesn't really underscore the question that neither side of politics, or in fact, almost none of the parties through this election campaign have spoken at all about some of these more strategic issues, right? Positioning Australia better for the future, getting energy costs down, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think the nuclear solution is necessarily going to actually be a cheaper solution either. It's almost like nobody wants to talk about stuff over the horizon. We're just going to talk about whatever we need to do just to get re-elected. So that's the problem, the policy vacuum. But when you start thinking about the migration question, the energy question, the housing question, all of those things are things which fundamentally are critical. But what about the productivity question, right? Because I haven't heard one policy specifically aligned to productivity improvement over the campaign so far? And I've missed it.
No, and Australia's productivity is deplorable. We've got some great charts here. Again, so the key chart to look at is the middle one there, and that's from Justin Farbo, again, Emptor and Macro. It shows that Australia's basically lagged the world in productivity growth since 2018. So his chart's indexed to 2018, but if you go back, it's been poor for a long time. But, you know, we've had the worst productivity growth out of all these advanced nations, you know, certainly recently. And if you look on the left-hand chart, the top one there, you can see Australia's productivity growth has been dragged down by the non-market sector. So what that is, they're basically government-funded jobs. So they can be private sector providers, but, you know, if you're a private NDIS provider, but you get most of your money through the NDIS through the government, you're in the non-market sector, right? So the private sector economies had, you know, trending upwards productivity growth for, you know, for the past 20 years. But the market sector, the non-market sector, which is this government-aligned, government-funded sector, its productivity growth, its productivity in 2025 is about the same as it was in 2005. So we've had basically 20 years of stagnation. And that's one of the reasons why Australia's productivity sucks. And, you know, unfortunately, with the expansion of the NDIS, I'm not doing a value judgment on the NDIS, but, you know, it's valued at, it's currently costs nearly $50 billion a year and it's projected to grow to about $100 billion in the next decade. That means we're going to have more of these non-market activity in the economy, which means that Australia's productivity growth is going to be, you know, less. And one of the other drivers of Australia's poor productivity has been mass immigration, because as a chart on the top right-hand side shows, our population has grown a lot faster than the growth in business investment, infrastructure, and housing. Effectively, you know, none of that stuff, none of the supply side economy has kept up with the massive increase in population, because Australia's population has increased the fastest rate in the advanced world, over 40% this century so far in the last 24 years. And we've grown the population by 8.5 million people this century, so since 2000. And we haven't kept infrastructure, you know, infrastructure hasn't kept up, the amount of business investment hasn't kept up, nothing's kept up. And as a result, the capital stock per person has declined. And when you get that, you get less productivity. So you get what's called capital shallowing. Now, I've used this example before to explain capital shallowing in a sort of stylized example so you can get your heads around it. But imagine you've got a cafe and you've got two people working one coffee machine, right, making cappuccinos and lattes and all that sort of stuff, right? And if those two people can make 50 coffees an hour, so the owner goes, you know what, there's a line out the door, we need to expand production. I'm going to hire two more people. So suddenly you've got four people working one coffee machine. So two people could produce 50 coffees an hour. Suddenly four people can only produce 75. And they can only produce 75 because they have to wait for each other. They're bumping into each other. There's congestion in the kitchen, all that sort of stuff. That is a classic example of capital shallowing. We've increased the number of people, but we haven't increased the capital stock to match. And as a result, our productivity has declined. And the bottom right chart there is interesting because it shows I plotted real per capita GDP and labour productivity, so GDP per hour worked, against the immigration rate. And you can see when the immigration was ramped up in the mid-2000s, you know, there's basically a negative correlation between high immigration and labour productivity and per capita GDP. Now, obviously, you know, correlation doesn't equal causation, but if you couple that chart with the capital shallowing chart above it, it's pretty obvious that running excessive immigration policy is detrimental to productivity in this country, and it has been. And let's be honest, we're not getting the right kind of migrants, right? We don't. If we were getting uber high skilled migrants who are getting paid really well and were super productive, it would be less of an issue. But we don't do that. Like most migrants, the average migrant worker earns less than an Australian-born worker in the same job, much less. According to the Migration Review, which was done by the Labor government handed down late 2023. It said that more than half, or about 51%, so just over half of international student graduates who'd been in Australia for 3 years worked in unskilled jobs. So these are supposed to be highly skilled people who've done bachelor degrees and have been in Australia for 3 years. So this isn't even the ones who left earlier, because they're probably worse. right? They've been in Australia for 3 years, are working in unskilled jobs, like, 51% working as baristas and, cleaners and delivery people and this sort of stuff. This is not a skilled migration system we've got here. We're not running one. And it's another reason why our productivity stinks. And I've argued previously that if you're a commodity-rich country like Australia, you have oodles and natural wealth. The worst thing you can do, or one of the worst things you can do, is do what Australia does and grow the population aggressively. Right? So we've grown our population by over 40% since the turn of the century, 8.5 million people. And that's just diluted our mineral wealth. So Australia, whether you like it or not, all our major exports, other than education, which are mostly fake, right, are commodity-based or, either agriculture or mining-based, right? We do a tourism in there, but the major exports are us selling off our fixed mineral endowment or agricultural exports. And none of that is reliant on population growth, right? Australia would be selling the same amount roughly of iron ore, coal, natural gas, even though I wish we sold less natural gas because we have cheaper prices, gold, agricultural, beef, dairy, all this other stuff that we sell, nickel, manganese. We've got oodles of resources in this country. That's what we sell to the rest of the world. That's how we pay our way in the world. And those exports are independent of population growth. We'd be selling roughly the same if we had a population of 20 million, as opposed to 27.5 million. And if we had 20 million, we'd be a richer country because we'd be splitting that mineral wealth, which we don't collect enough taxes from, that I'll admit. But the federal government does collect significant corporate taxes, and there are some mining royalties and stuff to go to the states. Those corporate taxes and those mining royalties would be getting shared amongst less people. And as a result, we'd have more to go around per person. This isn't rocket science. This is akin to, if you've got some parents, right, and you've got one sibling, and your parents pass away, and you go to collect your inheritance, and then you find out you had a long lost brother you never knew about, and they're in the will. And suddenly you go, oh shit, okay. I thought me and my sibling were going to collect the inheritance. Oh, now it's split 3 ways. Well, okay, we get less. That's effectively what Australia's doing. We're growing our population aggressively through immigration, and we're not growing any export industries around that, right, to earn our way in the world. We're not creating any productive industries around that because we don't have any industry anymore. We're sending all our manufacturing offshore. The only industries we've got are people servicing industries and, things like banking and finance, etc., for housing. There's no strategy around this other than just growth for growth's sake to keep the economy ticking over in the short term while per capita living standards collapse. And the absurdity of this, Martin, is the Centre for Population's latest population statement that was released in December projects that Australia's population is going to grow by 13.5 million people in the next 40 years. Now, 13.5 million people, just to put it in perspective, that's about 50% growth, right? 13.5 million people is the equivalent of another Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane in 40 years. So can you imagine all the houses in Sydney, all the houses in Melbourne and Brisbane, all the homes, all the infrastructure in those 3 cities, all the energy, everything in those 3 cities would have to be replicated, basically built again in the next 40 years to stop our living standards going backwards. Now, given it's taken Sydney 230 years to get to its current size, Melbourne about 200 years to get to its current size, and Brisbane, I'd say about 200 as well. I'm not sure when Brisbane was settled. It's taken us, these cities 200 to 240 or 230 odd years, whatever it is, to get to the current sizes. And we're going to magically do the same again in 40 years, according to these population projections, because that's what we need to do to stop our living standards going backwards, right? All the infrastructure and houses and everything else would need to be done again to accommodate 13.5 million people. It's not going to happen. So what it means is that we're going to have basically people living in high-rise slums and more people using the existing infrastructure base. We'll get some new infrastructure, but it won't be nearly enough. We're just going to have more congestion and lower living standards. For what? Why are we doing this? What is the purpose behind a big Australia, especially when the manufacturing share in this country is now about 5%. It's the lowest in the developed world, right? So I've actually got a chart on, there we go, chart on Australia's manufacturing, the middle chart there. The left chart and the middle chart. The left chart shows Australia's manufacturing share in the OECD. That's the one on the very far left, the axis, the lowest in the world. This was a couple of years ago when Australia's manufacturing share was actually a bit higher than it is now. And the chart in the middle that's straight from the ABS, the latest data. Australia's manufacturing share has collapsed to about 5% of the economy, and it's trending down. You can see a little dip at the end there. It's probably when, Queenos and, shut down. And if we continue with these high energy costs, that, like, how low is our manufacturing going to go? Is it going to go to what, 3%, 2%? Like, it can't go to zero because we're just going to have to manufacture some stuff, whether it be Coke cans or whatever, some food, etc. But this is a terminal decline that we're in, and this declining manufacturing is coming at the same time as we're going to, somehow need to build, with a 13.5 million population increase, probably what, 6.5, 7 million homes? I don't know, like a lot, 6 million homes to accommodate them, because a lot of them are going to be smaller. They're going to be apartments. Well, we're going to need a manufacturing base. We're going to need a lot of stuff to be able to do this. And unfortunately, as I said before, our last architectural glass maker, Oceanic Glass, which built the glass on Parliament House, all the windows in Parliament House, that shut down last month on high energy prices. Brickworks needs gas to make bricks to go into houses. Well, guess what? We've made gas super expensive. If we start importing it, it's going to be $20 a gigajoule on the East Coast. Well, how much is a brick going to cost? And, are they going to shut down? Then we have to import bricks as well. This whole economy it's in managed decline, I've got to say, unfortunately. And this is all brought about by dumb policy, and it's not made better by the fact that the major parties now are going to blow a bigger housing bubble, which is going to push more productive capital and resources away from the productive side of the economy. It's just, it's hard to sum up what I'm trying to say here, but it's like it's deliberate managed decline.
Mm. And just the other part of the decline, which I want to highlight now, is the tax take. So we know that the total debt is bubbling higher over the next 10 years. We know that the greater proportion of tax is now being borne by working people through their wages rather than corporates. And the expectation, despite the promise of slightly small tax giveaways of various flavors from the two majors, the tax take is going to have to continue to rise because there is no alternative. We are giving a lot of money to a lot of the corporates around the place, including some in the energy sector and in the resources sector. That's government money. But we're not taking enough from them in terms of tax. So by definition, the only source is then to tax people more. And that's what we're seeing with the frozen tax bans.
Yeah, and the amount of subsidies going in a lot of directions is ridiculous. So I look at the renewables side, like that is the amount of money going into renewables, whether it's or if you want to purchase an EV or whatever, like there's just money being fire hosed into all manners of the economy. And, so a classic one's the energy bill relief, right? So we create an energy crisis by denying ourselves cheap energy through whether it's coal, gas, whatever. We make all this stuff super expensive when it doesn't have to be, given that we're major exporters of both and we sell it cheaply to the rest of the world, but we deny ourselves cheap energy. And the government solution is, we're going to spend billions of taxpayer dollars subsidizing our energy bills. Well, you're not solving the problem. The problem is we've got expensive energy when it should be cheap. And look, mate, I'm a Victorian, and a lot of people would throw tomatoes at me, but Victoria had super cheap electricity. We had some of the cheapest electricity in the world because we've got brown coal, right? Now, yes, I know it's carbon intensive, right? It spews carbon. We could we could build some new plants so that they at least don't spew out black soot and everything. But yes, it's always going to create lots of carbon dioxide. That's just the nature of it. But it's basically free because we built the Yallourn power station and the other power stations in Gippsland where the coal is, and you can literally just shovel the stuff in. It's got zero value. It's non-tradable. But the government's decided to shut this stuff down, so we can't burn it. And similar in Queensland with their black coal. I mean, Queensland, the biggest coal exporter in the world, they export many times more coal to Asia than they burn themselves. But then, they did have a plan to shut down their coal-fired generation as well, while they continue to sell to China while China burns it, or other countries. And interestingly, the Queensland government last week, and good on them, I say, the Queensland government actually extended they said they're not going to shut down their coal-fired generation, and they also backed out of their renewable energy target. They said it's unachievable, so they backed down their renewable energy target, and they also said they're going to back out of their emissions, reduction target as well, because they've obviously seen the writing on the wall. They probably think, how absurd is this? We export 3/4 of our gas, roughly, and we export 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, times coal that they burn domestically, and China's just burning it instead. Well, why not export a tiny bit less, burn it at home, and the world's carbon footprint is no worse. If you export a bit less and you burn more at home, you gave yourself cheap energy, the impact on the climate would be no different, because China will just burn a bit less and you burn a bit more. And in fact, in the case of gas, you're actually better off burning it domestically. It's better for the environment because you don't have to liquefy it. And when you liquefy it, you lose about 10% of your gas because it's so energy intensive. So instead of, freezing it to minus 200 or whatever it is, an engineer would know the exact amount, and going through that whole energy intensive process, and then putting it on a big cargo ship and then shipping it across to China and then degasifying it and then burning it in China. How about just burning it out of the ground in Australia? Right? It's more energy efficient, and it would give us cheap energy. And, one thing I will say is the East Coast gas contracts start to roll off in 2030. So these long-term contracts that were signed, they start to, by about between 2030 and 2035, a whole bunch of the contracts expire. Well, the next government, or whoever the government of the day is, they should not allow those contracts to be re-signed unless there is ample cheap gas for domestic users. Because the gas cartellers will just try and sign another long-term contracts, and they'll try and keep gouging us at home, but that should not be allowed. Australia needs to be able to use their own energy, and we need to have it. It needs to be cheap and it needs to be reliable. And that's why I say, how is it that our policymakers, again, think that it's reasonable to sell 4 times more gas than you use at home and sell 5 to 6 times more coal than you use at home, but then deny Australians from using that same energy and giving ourselves a stable and affordable energy system? Because we don't have that. We've got an unstable, intermittent, with renewables, an expensive energy system, an increasingly expensive energy system. And as a result, we're paying the consequences. And it doesn't have to be this way.
Interestingly, we've always got options, although some people say we're too far down the rabbit hole. We can't sort of extract ourselves from where we are. But the point is, if we don't start turning a corner, we just go further and further down into that spiral. And you mentioned managed decline earlier on. I actually think managed decline is unfortunately what we're seeing, which sort of brings us quite interestingly to 2 points. The first is, of course, we've also now got the international uncertainty of the Pax Americana retracting through what Trump is doing, particularly around tariffs. And we've got also the dynamics in the bond markets, where bond markets have gone quite a lot higher than people expected, because people expected that maybe they would go the other way. So interesting situation now. The Reserve Bank will be meeting in May. They just put out their minutes today, actually. And what was quite interesting about those minutes was that they were saying, ho-hum, well, we're not sure, we'll wait for the data, et cetera. It's not possible to determine the timing of the next move in interest rates. We need to sustainably return inflation to target. Now, of course, that was all pre-Trump tariffs, right? So in a way, you can write that set of minutes off as not being that relevant. What's your take on what the Reserve Bank is likely to do? And how does this play into our earlier discussion about home prices, given you mentioned that rates probably mean they're going to come down, which means that you can afford to borrow more. And then the other side of it is What's left? I mean, I've noticed that gold is continuing to climb, and some people are saying, well, maybe gold is the only thing we got left.
Yeah, well, interesting. I put so if you just switch across, I've got a chart. This is the latest futures pricing. How did that go across? Sorry. Hang on. I need to share this one. Sorry, guys. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to work. Anyway, I had the latest futures market pricing on interest rates, and what it showed is that by December 2025, the financial markets are tipping the cash rate to be, well, it says 2.9%, which obviously can't get down to 2.9. It's going to be 2.85, but they're effectively still tipping, what's that, 5 more rate cuts by, is that 5? Yeah, I think it is. Or rate cuts by the end of the year. So the cash rate to be about 2.85% by the end of the year. So where's that 4 more? I'm just trying to think. No, it's 5, I think.
5.
So yeah, five more rate cuts by the end of the year. So if that happens, I mean, who knows? The reason why I say who knows is that before Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs, I think financial markets were tipping, 3 more rate cuts, which seemed to be the norm, median projection of economists. And then after the tariffs were implemented, and then we had the short correction in the financial markets, etc., they then predicted 5 rate cuts. The pricing, the probabilities been reduced a little bit. It was 2.85%, I think, as of Friday. By the end of the year, now it says 2.9. This is all just betting, but it's still about 5 rate cuts. If we got that, that would be massively inflationary for the housing market, obviously. So lower rate cuts obviously mean, lower cash rate obviously means lower mortgage rates, which means cost less to service a mortgage, means your borrowing capacity goes up. And then if you add that to Labor's policies, which with their 5% deposit policy, that would come in on 1 January 2026. So we'd probably start to get a run up we might actually get some people holding off. They might hold off to the 1st of January, because if you're a first home buyer, you might as well wait. Some home buyers will wait till next January. But, early next year, if we got this, you're going to get a massive house price boom. It's as simple as that, because you're going to have lower cost of credit, increasing borrowing capacity from that. Then you have the increase in borrowing capacity from not having to count student debts in your loan application, and then also being able to borrow at a 5% deposit backed by the taxpayer. So this is all red rag to a bull for house prices. And you can see a massive run up in house prices. Another mini, I don't know how long it'll last. I mean, housing is structurally expensive at the moment. It sort of seems unreal that you could get another run up in prices, but with these sorts of policies, you would. And would that mean that in 2 years' time, we'll be doing this, doing one of these interviews, and will Australia's housing be 5 times the economy? At the moment, it's about 4 times the economy, just over 4 times. And if it is, that would be just a bubble like, I don't think we've ever seen before, especially not in the advanced, the Western world, Hong Kong, and there's other places. So there are some edge cases which are much worse than that. But in terms of the Anglo countries, I think that would break the record, which is currently being held, I think, by New Zealand. Whereas I wish I put charts in here. New Zealand's actually had a big house price correction, and their government's letting their housing market deflate. So New Zealand real house prices are actually down to what they were at the end of 2019, after having the biggest price boom during the pandemic. And then they've lost all those gains, and now New Zealand's become a lot more affordable. But I think by memory, New Zealand's housing market was about 4.5 times its economy at its peak. So I think we're going to smash that with these sorts of policies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the trajectory is probably up. And just somebody was asking, so this is the latest on gold. So you can see there that the gold futures contract's at 3,236, still climbing. And of course, the issue there is that people are not totally sure as to why things are looking this way. Is it a flight to quality? Is it gold moving back from the US via COMEX now to Europe because of the tariff? Who knows? But there is an interesting observation here that when things are very uncertain, gold does become a little more attractive, and we'll see how that plays out. But if you think about the options for most people in Australia, you'd have to say, Leith, that the property Ponzi is set to continue to pump. So you would expect to see more people piling in. You would expect to see more investors trying to pile in, getting ever more negative gearing leverage. That means, of course, that other taxpayers are going to actually paying money across to the property investors to be able to actually allow them to invest even more. So it looks as though we've learned nothing over the last 10 or 15 years, absolutely nothing. And yet through this election cycle, we're just going through the same, rinse and recycle again. The only way I can see that we're going to solve this, because I don't think we're going to see politicians change their tune, is we're going to go on pumping and pumping and pumping until we get a crash. It's the only logical solution.
Yeah. It does make you wonder, like, I guess they always invent new ways to disappoint you. But what I think happened on the weekend is, I reckon whether it was Labor or the Coalition, one of them got word that the other one was thinking about doing something. And as a result, they're like, okay, we're gonna beat that. So, because it was very curious that on the same day, you got both parties announcing these absurdly stimulatory policies. Like, they're obviously different, but they got the similar impact, right? So it's Pepsi and Coke. And it's kind of weird that they happened at the same day, which made me think that one of the parties got word that the other one was looking to do this, and then the other one got word that the other one was going to do this, and then they end up just having this Mexican standoff, and then they just both said, all right, bugger it, and they both went for it at the same time. Because how else do you explain it? And then we also, of course, got the same policy, or similar dumb policies, whereby the Coalition, I think, said they'll give everyone a $1,200 tax to cost of living payment or something like that in their tax returns, and then Labor said they'll allow everyone to write off $1,000 as just
no receipts,
which was similar. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. No receipts. So it was a very similar sort of. They both did these policies at the same time that were different but similar at the same time, and similar in that they'll also erode the tax base and erode the federal budget and make it worse. So it's just, as I said, when the federal budget came out and then the budget reply, I wasn't feeling too down about this sort of stuff, because the federal budget was a bit of a nothing burger. It had some a tiny tax cut in 2 years' time. It was marginal for everyone, big deal. There was a bit of other stuff, but there was nothing really major in there. And then the Coalition came out with their excellent gas reservation policy. Again, not perfect, but I never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So I was actually feeling, I remember I got on radio the next day and I was actually feeling pretty motivated, because I thought, oh, geez, the Coalition were really good, and maybe they got a chance. And then I hope that Labor would then copy that policy rather than copying these stupid housing policies. And I thought, oh, there's a good chance Labor will say, what, we'll do a reservation as well. And if they did that, I would have been happy. But instead, a couple of weeks later, we get Trump's tariffs, and then that throws a spanner in the works. And then obviously brings forward the likelihood of interest rate cuts. And then we got the weekend, which was just, honestly, mate, when I woke up on Sunday morning and I started reading this, I was just like, WTF? Like, this has got to be a joke. Like, when I first read it, I had to then go to a different, because I was reading on, I think it was Microsoft News, whatever, because it comes up in my app. And I thought it was just a really quick few lines. I thought, oh, no, hang on, this is wrong. And then I went to the ABC and I'm like, what? And then went somewhere else and was like, oh my God, this is real. And then I think I read Peter Dutton's response. I think Labor came out with theirs first, and then Dutton looked like he was going to do a response. Maybe he had it ready. I'm not sure. But it was just, by Sunday night, I was just like, this is bizarro world. You think policy making can't get worse, and they always manage to disappoint you, these guys. And it's been like this. I'll be honest, like, I've had this conversation with Dave, my business partner, many times, where I said, mate, just when you think it can't get worse, like you've hit rock bottom, you then the floor gives way and then you fall to another bottom. And it's been like that for the last, let's be honest, it's been like that for decades, or really since the Rudd Gillard government, I got to say. Since their fateful decision to allow to approve gas exports from Gladstone without any reservation. Like, that was just an absolute moronic policy when they did that. And ever since, we've just had dumb on top of dumb. And what we saw last Saturday with this housing stuff was just probably arguably the worst policy making I've seen in my 47 years of life. It was that bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the idea is that if you've got a problem, don't keep digging, right? But they keep digging, and they keep doing.
They didn't just dig. They didn't just dig. They went and they bought a massive Caterpillar mining digger, one of those ginormous ones, 2-story, the biggest ones in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And they dug with that.
Yeah, you can dig down further. We're a mining country, so we can keep digging, and that's really the point. So interesting observation as we come towards the end of the show then is we know that the two major parties are pretty much neck and neck in terms of their stupidity. We know that the Greens is up there with its high migration, never mind the impact on the everybody else sort of story, which
and also free everything with the Greens. They just want to have everything free.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's interesting, of course, that they've sort of positioned themselves to try and say, well, no, we are the party that is for the renters, but when you actually look at their policies, you've got to say, well, hang on a moment, that doesn't make a lot of sense based on what we're seeing in practice. Maybe no surprise that the consumer confidence was down again over the last week, right? And you can see that across the housing cohorts. The expectation is that the weekly inflation expectation up at 4.6%. So that's all very high, which may put a bit of a throttle on what the RBA can do. So I guess the question is, given where we are with the political environment in Australia, it makes it quite tough for people to think about what to do, in terms of the upcoming vote. Because, if you look at the latest, you've got the primary vote with the coalition around 35, Labor at 33. So at the moment, if you find the major party gets in, they're going to get in with a third or thereabouts of the votes, right? And the other parties there, the 7% who are uncommitted, and that's translating to a two-party preferred 48-52 towards the ALP at the moment. I guess so. Sort of the closing question then is, what's the point? It looks to me as though we're a bit messed up whichever way we go.
Yeah, that's right. Look. I'll disclose. I'm not going to be voting for them. I always vote for minor parties, but I'll be preferencing the coalition above Labor and the Greens, purely because obviously I've been following the energy debate for a long time. And, Dave's, my business partner's been doing it longer than me on the gas, but I've been pretty hard on the radio and doing a lot of media pushing for reservation for probably 2 years now. Dave's been doing it for about 10. So based on that alone, I'd vote for the coalition because they're the only ones with a gas reservation policy. And that's the one I really care about. That's the policy, out of all the policies on offer, that's the thing I care about. All the rest of it's garbage. Actually, coalition also wants slightly lower immigration. So that's definitely a big plus in my book. So the coalition has two things that I want, and that's gas reservation and lower immigration. But everything else is garbage. And Labor's pretty much garbage across the board, in my opinion. So, I don't give it. Look, honestly, I couldn't care less about the nuclear thing. That's so far away. Nuclear power, all that. I'm actually not against it. I don't really care. I just think Australia should use what it's already got. It has oodles of coal and thousands of years of coal. And it's already set up. It's already built. All the transmission wires are already built. Sure, we can upgrade the power plants and, retrofit them and whatever to make them a bit cleaner in terms of not carbon, but, soot and all the other stuff. I just think we should keep using what we've got because China, India, the US now are doing it. So why are we killing ourselves? Like, give ourselves cheap gas, cheap coal, give ourselves cheap energy. You might actually still have an economy at the end of it. But that's why I'm preferencing the coalition. Gas, reservation, and immigration, but I will never put them first. I always put minor parties first. But, whoever's listening to this, it's your vote. Do what you think's right. Do what you want to do. But in the end, whoever gets in, we're going to have a Muppet show still. So, it's no, if it's a Labor minority government with the Greens, God help us, I think that'd almost be the worst. I'd actually prefer Labor gets in with a full majority rather than a Labor Greens coalition, to be quite frank. But pick your poison.
Just pick your poison, isn't it? And by the way, on the Labor side, the unrealized capital gains strategy that they've got there is something which people have not been very aware of, right? With regards to initially focusing on the superannuation over 3 mil and saying, well, we'll charge you on the movements of the price rather than actually when you sell, right? But then there's a chance they'll roll that out more broadly. Of course they will, right?
Yeah.
So, and yet this is a policy that they've not actually mentioned once through the campaign, which I think is also quite interesting. So not only you should think about what they are saying, but also think about what they're not saying.
Mate, if the Greens got their way, we would legitimately become a third world nation. There's no way. Like, we'd have third world rates of immigration. Well, we already do, but it'd be open borders nuttery. And they want to shut down all fossil fuel. So we'd have, if they got their way, we wouldn't export any coal, any gas, whatever. We wouldn't have, how would we pay our way in the world? Like it or not, the reason why Australia is rich is because of our mineral endowment. It's not because we're clever. It's not because of anything. We're rich because of our mineral endowment, right? And they want to shut all that down. So it's like, and then they want everything to be free. Like, basically, we want to have, what's the latest thing? It was like $40 billion a year, some absurd amount of money. Oh, yeah, sorry, free university for everybody, uncapped, unlimited, whatever. Everyone goes to TAFE uni for free, whatever. Like, as if we don't have enough people going to uni at the moment. We need more people doing bloody trades and real jobs, not doing bullshit degrees. Sorry, pardon my French. And they want, free this, free that, free everything. We'd just be basically a third world nation. So if the Greens got their way, and they say they want to save the environment, well, yeah, I'm sorry, mate. With 100 million people in the country, I don't think, with open borders, etc., I don't think we'd have a very good environment either, to be quite frank. So I hope that the Greens stay on the outer, and I hope they don't get a role as a coalition government.
Well, I want to say, Leith, thank you very much for your thoughts tonight. And you and I came at this property conundrum separately, but concluded the same very quickly, right? So it's pretty.
Yeah, well, we hadn't actually legit. We had not talked about it. I mean, we for about 5 seconds before we went live.
Yeah.
So this was just purely my take, your take, and look. But honestly, mate, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to say that this is bad. And to economists' credit, I don't know. I often, slag economists, or some economists. Some are excellent, but this was one area where I think universally, pretty much every single economist I read, doesn't matter if people, ones I've agreed with and other stuff, whatever, or disagreed in the past.
Yeah,
it was universal that this is a dud. But that these housing policies are destructive. I don't think I read one in support.
No, Chris Richardson came out, dumpster fire. It was brilliant, I thought, what he was saying. Yeah,
dumpster fire of bad policies. It was great. Dumpster fire. I love that too.
Yes, indeed. So, I've covered a bit out on my show, and I'll cover it more. So I want to say, Lee, thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening. I'll look forward to having you back on again in a month or two, as we often do. And by then, we'll be through the election, and who knows where we'll be. But appreciate your time tonight. If people want to find out more about you, where do they go?
Yeah, so I write daily on macrobusiness.com.au. That's sort of the mothership. We're right about, there's lots of housing stuff at the moment. So if you like this housing stuff, that's been dominating everything, obviously, this week, but also energy and, other areas, political stuff, policy, economics, that kind of thing. Also got a YouTube channel. It's nothing like this one in terms of professionalism, but I've got it. It's at Leith Vo, Leithvo. All it is, it's just my interviews. So when I do interviews, and I seem to be doing so many of them these days, they're probably at the moment doing about 10 a week. I just put my interviews up. So that's all it is. Like radio mostly, but TV as well. I did Current Affair last week. That was just a quick story. I won't keep it long, but my daughter, I've been doing TV and radio for years, right? So I've done probably 300 or so in the last year or so. And, so I'm always saying to my daughter, look, I'm just going out the back room, just going on TV, whatever. She goes, yeah, rolls her eyes, whatever. Anyway, then last week I did a Current Affair live, and I said, I'm going out the back and doing a Current Affair. And she's like, what? you're doing a current affair? Like it was and she said, yeah, so what I do, Dad. And she said, Dad, you've made it. And I just went, what? And she goes, you've made it, Dad. I said, yeah, Laura, I do TV all the time. Like, you know that? She goes, yes, but that's the news. This is TV, Dad. You're on TV. and mate, I was laughing my head off. So I went and did the interview, and then my phone blew up. And it seems everyone watches a current affair. So usually when I do these interviews, you get like one person text, oh, I saw you and whatever, Mate, I got about 50 messages. And then I went to boxing in my gym. All these people, hey, I saw you on a current affair. So I think every Australian seems to watch a current affair. And according to my daughter, you've made it if you're on a current affair. So there you go.
Yeah. I've done a few of those over the years, and I always got more feedback from that particular channel than almost any other, weirdly.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, well, my wife looked up and said it gets a million views an episode. So I'm glad I didn't know that, because I would have been nervous going on. If I knew a million people could be watching, I would have been really, because it was a live interview. I didn't know what she was going to ask.
Yeah.
And I was a bit, I just sort of winged it. But I'll be nervous next time now.
Well, you do very well. Thank you, Leith. Appreciate your time, and take care over the next 2 or 3 weeks as the election progresses. Just chill out a little, right? And I'll look forward to seeing you in a month or two.
Yeah, thanks, man. Speak to you next time.
Take care. I'm going to take you offline. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I just want to say, Jason, thank you very much for the sticker. I'm sorry that the super chat didn't work. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway, I appreciate the contribution there. And to everybody else who's added to the comments in the chat through the show, I hope you found that interesting. Next week, I've got Adam Stokes coming back on. We're going to sort of talk about the crypto world and what's happened, and post-Trump and post, the recent changes, what's happening there. So that should be fun. And I'll look forward to seeing you then. And of course, check out our recorded shows every day of the week that we put them up. And I've got one dog. The other dog is down by my around the corner. So there's Luna there looking sound asleep. So time for a dog walk. Anyway, I want to say thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening. I hope you found that interesting and informative, and perhaps helped a little bit to sort of separate the fog from reality. And as you think about your election vote, make sure your vote counts. It's pretty important. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics signing off. We'll see you next time. Take care.